Claire Whitmore thought she had it all figured out. At 28, she was the youngest CEO in Chicago, commanding billion-dollar deals from her glass tower high above the city. But when she let out that cruel laugh about her poor black driver, who probably doesn't even know what we do here, she had no idea that Malik Johnson was listening, and that he spoke 9 languages fluently. What happened next would either destroy her career forever or teach her that the man she dismissed as just hired help was about to save the most important deal of her life, and show her what real love looks like. But first, she'd have to face the devastating moment when her own words came back to haunt her, and choose between everything she thought she wanted and the one thing she never knew she needed. If you're watching this incredible story of second chances and unexpected love, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The elevator hummed softly as Claire Whitmore descended from her penthouse to the garage. At 28, she ruled her father's company with an iron grip that left little room for warmth. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman dressed for war, sharp black suit, hair pulled back tight, and eyes that missed nothing. "Sienna," she spoke into her phone's voice recorder as the floors counted down. "Today's signing week starts with the partner consortium meeting at noon. I need the Henderson files on my desk," the translator confirmed, "and tell Ruth I want 5 minutes before we walk into that room." The elevator opened into the underground garage where warm air met her like a gentle embrace. Her breath came out in small puffs despite the heating. Chicago winters didn't care about penthouse apartments or billion-dollar deals. A spotless black sedan waited near the elevator, engine running. Through the windshield, she could see her driver checking something on his phone. Malik Johnson. The agency had assigned him this week while her regular driver recovered from surgery. Claire barely looked at him as she approached the car. He stepped out quickly, moving around to open her door. He wore a neat uniform and modest gloves that had seen better days but were clean and well cared for. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore," Malik said, his voice steady and professional. "There's a closure on Lower Wacker. I've mapped an alternate route that should save us about 10 minutes. She slipped into the back seat without responding. The car smelled faintly of leather cleaner and something else, maybe cinnamon. It was actually pleasant, though she'd never admit it. "Traffic update?" she asked as he settled behind the wheel. "Light through the loop. We'll arrive 15 minutes early as requested." Malik adjusted the rearview mirror slightly. "I have bottled water if you need it, and your printed agenda is in the seat pocket." Claire glanced at the agenda he'd somehow obtained from Sienna. The pages were perfectly aligned, no creases. Details like that usually went unnoticed, but her stress made everything sharper. Her phone rang. Ruth Caldwell's name appeared on the screen. "Ruth." "Claire, darling, are you ready for today?" Ruth's voice carried that tone. Sweet on the surface, steel underneath. As board chair, Ruth had watched Claire struggle through her first year as CEO. Some days, Ruth felt more like a disappointed mother than a business partner. "I'm ready." Claire watched the city wake up through tinted windows. "The consortium team arrives at 11:30. We'll have 30 minutes to review terms before the meeting." "The board is watching this one closely," Ruth said. "Evan tells me there are still questions about your leadership style." Leadership style. Claire knew what that meant. Too young, too emotional. Too much like her father in all the wrong ways, not enough in the right ones. "I'll deliver," Claire said. "Of course you will." Ruth's pause spoke volumes. "No mistakes today." The call ended, leaving Claire with familiar tightness in her chest. She'd built walls around herself for good reason. Trust was expensive, and she'd learned early that people who got close always wanted something. Malik caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right?" The question was simple, but something in his tone made her pause. Most people asked out of politeness. Malik sounded like he actually wanted to know. "Fine," she said, then immediately felt ridiculous for being cold to someone who was just doing his job. Her phone buzzed again. Evan Park, her CFO, sent a text. "Translator had an emergency. We're getting a replacement. Hope they're better than the last one." Great. Another variable she couldn't control. Ms. Whitmore? Malik's voice was gentle. We're almost there. Would you like me to wait outside headquarters or circle the block? She looked up, realizing they'd arrived without her noticing. The headquarters building stretched 30 floors above them, all glass and steel, reaching toward a gray winter sky. Wait outside, she said. I'll need to leave for the hotel at 11:40. Malik stepped out and opened her door. As she stood, she noticed his gloves again, worn but dignified. His uniform was pressed perfectly despite being standard issue. He took pride in his work, even if the work seemed simple. Thank you, she said, surprising herself. You're welcome, ma'am. Claire walked toward the building's entrance, where Sienna waited with a tablet and the expression of someone who'd already had too much coffee. Morning, Claire. The new translator just confirmed, young guy, seems nervous but has good credentials. Also, the consortium team is bringing 6 people instead of 4. Claire's stomach tightened. She hated surprises, especially on days like this. What changed? 2 additional delegates. Nadia Kassim is bringing technical specialists. Sienna looked up from her tablet. On the bright side, Malik seems really prepared. He had your agenda printed before I even sent it to the car service. Claire glanced back at the sedan, where Malik waited patiently, reading something on his phone. He's just hired help, Sienna. Don't read too much into it. But even as she said it, something didn't feel right. The way he'd asked if she was all right. The printed agenda. The alternate route he'd planned without being asked. She shook her head. Today was about the deal, not her driver. Inside the building, the executive elevator carried her to the 31st floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. On clear days, she could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. Today, gray clouds pressed down like a ceiling. Claire, Evan Park's voice cut through her thoughts. He hurried down the hallway, his tie already slightly askew despite the early hour. We need to talk. What now? The board called an emergency session for Friday. If today doesn't go perfectly, he didn't need to finish. Claire understood. It will go perfectly, she said. The new driver seems professional enough, Evan said. Though some of the staff have been talking. About what? Nothing specific, just, you know how people talk about new faces. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. Office gossip was like poison. It spread quickly and killed slowly. What are they saying? Just wondering who he is, where he came from, normal stuff. Evan adjusted his tie. You know how it is with... He didn't finish the sentence, but Claire knew what he meant. She'd heard the whispers when Malik had walked through the lobby that first day. A young black man in a driver's uniform attracted attention in their mostly white corporate world. It's not our business, she said sharply. He's temporary anyway. They walked past the elevator bay where several staff members stood waiting. Claire caught fragments of conversation. New driver this week. Seems nice enough. Wonder where he's from. The words weren't malicious, but they sat wrong in Claire's stomach. She thought about Malik's careful politeness, his pressed uniform, the way he'd asked if she was all right. At least he can't ruin a billion-dollar deal, she said to Sienna, loud enough for the others to hear. The laugh that followed was harsher than she'd intended. It echoed off the marble walls and seemed to hang in the air. Several people smiled uncomfortably. Sienna's expression tightened. Claire. What? I'm just saying. Drivers drive. They don't negotiate contracts. Another laugh escaped before she could stop it. Poor guy probably doesn't even know what we do here. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to reveal Malik standing inside. He must have come up to return something. Her forgotten phone charger was in his hand. The hallway fell silent. Malik's eyes met Claire's for just a moment. His face remained perfectly neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. Not hurt exactly, more like disappointment, but covered quickly by professional distance. Your charger, Ms. Whitmore, he said, his voice steady. You left it in the car. Claire's throat went dry. How much had he heard? The way he looked at her, not angry, not wounded, just measured. Like he was taking her exact measurement and filing it away. Thank you, she managed. Malik handed her the charger and stepped back into the elevator. As the doors closed, he said quietly, "I'll have the car ready at 11:40. The doors shut. The hallway remained silent for a long moment. "Well," Sienna said finally, "we should get going." Claire looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed amused. All of them would remember this moment, and some would repeat it. "Right," she said. "The hotel." But as they walked toward the other elevator, Claire couldn't shake the image of Malik's face. Professional, composed, and somehow deeply disappointed in her. 20 minutes later, they sat in the back of the sedan as Chicago traffic crawled around them. Malik drove with quiet efficiency, taking the alternate route he'd planned. Claire stared out the window, trying to focus on the upcoming meeting. "Turn here," she said unnecessarily as they approached the hotel. "Yes, ma'am." His voice held no trace of what had happened upstairs. Maybe she'd imagined his reaction. Maybe drivers were used to being dismissed by people like her. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it made her feel hollow. The hotel appeared ahead, downtown luxury with marble columns and doormen in long coats. Malik pulled into the circular drive and stopped smoothly at the entrance. He stepped out to open her door. "I'll wait here," he said. "Good luck with your meeting." Claire paused as she stood. "Thank you." She walked into the hotel lobby without looking back, but she could feel Malik watching her go. At the revolving door, she glanced over her shoulder. He stood beside the car, checking his watch, then said something under his breath in what sounded like another language. The thought struck her as odd, but the hotel doors swept her into luxury and marble and the scent of expensive flowers. By the time she reached the conference level, she'd pushed the moment from her mind. Ruth Caldwell waited near the ballroom doors, her silver hair perfectly styled, her smile sharp as a blade. "Claire, darling, ready for battle?" "Always." Evan appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless. "The consortium team just arrived. The translator looks about 16 years old." Claire's stomach dropped. "Tell me you're joking." "Fresh out of college, speaks the right languages, but—" Evan shrugged helplessly. "No mistakes today," Ruth said, echoing her earlier words. "The board is already asking questions about your readiness for this level of responsibility." Claire straightened her shoulders. "Then let's show them they're wrong." Inside the conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Chicago River. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. The consortium team sat on one side of the table, led by Nadia Kassem, a woman in her mid-30s with intelligent eyes and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Her team flanked her, several speaking quietly in languages Claire couldn't identify. "Ms. Whitmore," Nadia stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for hosting us." "The pleasure is ours." Claire shook hands, noticing Nadia's firm grip and direct gaze. This was not a woman who would accept empty promises or political maneuvering. The young translator, barely out of college, just as Evan had said, positioned himself between the two groups. His hands shook slightly as he opened his notebook. "Shall we begin?" Nadia asked. What followed was an hour of carefully worded negotiations, translated comments, and growing tension. The translator struggled with nuance, turning casual observations into formal commitments, and missing the subtle implications that could make or break a deal. When one of Nadia's delegates mentioned conditional intent regarding implementation timelines, the translator rendered it as firm commitment. Claire, hearing firm commitment, responded with confidence. "Excellent. We can definitely meet those expectations." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nadia's expression went carefully neutral. One of her delegates murmured something sharp in what might have been Arabic. "I'm sorry," Nadia said carefully. "I believe there may have been a miscommunication." Claire's pulse quickened. "What kind of miscommunication?" "We expressed conditional interest, pending certain technical reviews."
We have not.
yet made firm commitments regarding timelines. The translator went pale. I thought, let me review my notes. Claire felt the deal slipping away like water through her fingers. Everything she'd worked for, everything the board expected, crumbling because of a translation error. Perhaps, Nadia said, closing her folder halfway, we should reconvene when communication is clearer. It was polite. It was diplomatic. It was also a dismissal that would cost Claire's company millions and probably her job. Could we take a brief recess? Claire asked, hearing the desperation in her own voice. Of course. The consortium team stepped out into the hallway. Ruth's eyes promised consequences if this couldn't be fixed. Evan looked like he might be sick. What do we do? The translator whispered. I don't understand what went wrong. Claire stared out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, Malik waited patiently by the car, probably reading or checking traffic for the return trip. Simple problems, clear solutions. If only this was as simple as getting from point A to point B. Through the conference room's glass doors, she could see Nadia's team in intense discussion. One delegate gestured emphatically while speaking rapidly in a language that definitely wasn't English. The translator stared helplessly. I can't follow what they're saying. Claire felt everything she'd worked for slipping away. The board would have her resignation by evening. Her father's company, the legacy she'd tried so hard to preserve, would pass to someone else. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered, What am I supposed to do now? The words hung in the air like a prayer with no clear answer. Claire stood frozen by the conference room window, watching everything she'd worked for crumble. The translator fumbled through his notes while Nadia's team spoke rapidly in languages that might as well have been code. Each foreign word felt like another nail in her professional coffin. Miss Whitmore? Ruth's voice cut through the chaos. Perhaps we should call this meeting to a close and reschedule when we have better resources. Better resources. Translation. When they had a CEO who could actually close a deal. Claire's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She needed to call the car service, get Malik, and figure out how to salvage what remained of her career. But as she looked toward the conference room doors, she saw something that made her stop. Malik stood just outside the glass doors in the hallway. He must have come up from the parking garage. Maybe the hotel staff had asked him to move the car, or maybe he'd grown tired of waiting. But what struck her wasn't his presence, it was his expression. He was listening, not eavesdropping exactly, but clearly following the rapid conversation happening between Nadia's delegates. His head tilted slightly, the way people did when concentrating on something important. One of the delegates gestured sharply and said something that sounded frustrated. Malik's eyebrows rose slightly, and Claire could have sworn she saw him nod in understanding. Claire, Evan whispered urgently. We need to make a decision. But Claire was watching Malik. As another delegate spoke, this time in what might have been French, Malik's lips moved slightly, as if he was translating under his breath. The poor driver, who probably doesn't even know what we do here. Her own words from that morning echoed in her mind, and suddenly she felt sick. Not from the failing deal, but from the possibility that she'd been completely, utterly wrong. Excuse me, she said to the room. I'll be right back. Claire walked to the door, her heart pounding. Ruth called after her, but she ignored it. She stepped into the hallway where Malik waited. Malik, she said quietly. I know this is going to sound strange, but do you understand what they're saying in there? Malik looked at her for a long moment. His face was carefully neutral, but she could see him weighing something in his mind. Some of it, he said finally. Some of it? The gentleman in the blue suit is speaking Arabic. He's frustrated because he thinks the translator misunderstood the technical specifications. The woman beside Ms. Kassim just said in French that they might need to reconsider the partnership entirely. Claire's mouth fell open. You speak Arabic and French? Among others. Among others. Claire felt the world tilt slightly. How many others? Malik hesitated. It depends how you count dialects. Roughly. 9 languages, more or less. 9 languages. The poor driver she'd laughed about that morning spoke 9 languages. Claire stared at him, remembering every dismissive comment, every assumption she'd made. Why didn't you say anything? You didn't ask. His voice was gentle, but she heard the hurt underneath. And frankly, after this morning, I wasn't sure you'd want my help, even if you knew. This morning, the laugh. The cruel joke about the poor driver who probably didn't even know what they did there. Malik, Ms. Whitmore? Nadia's voice came from behind them. Is everything all right? Claire turned to see Nadia standing in the conference room doorway, her expression politely curious, but clearly ready to end this meeting. This was it. The moment that would define everything. Claire could apologize, reschedule, and hope for another chance that might never come. Or she could trust the man she'd humiliated just hours earlier. Actually, Claire said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, I'd like you to meet someone. This is Malik Johnson, our multilingual operations specialist. Malik's eyes widened slightly at the title, but he stepped forward with quiet dignity. Ms. Kassem, he said with a slight bow. I believe there may have been some confusion about the implementation timeline specifications. Nadia's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. You understand Arabic? I do. Your colleague, Mr. Al-Rashid, mentioned concerns about the technical compatibility requirements. I believe the issue stems from a translation of conditional intent versus firm commitment. Nadia glanced back at her team, then at Claire, then back at Malik. Please, come in. What happened next felt like watching someone rebuild a bridge while it was falling down. Malik didn't dominate the conversation or show off his abilities. Instead, he simply clarified what people meant when they spoke. When Mr. Al-Rashid expressed concerns in Arabic about data security protocols, Malik translated the nuance that had been lost. Conditional interest pending security reviews, not outright rejection. When the French delegate mentioned timing concerns, Malik caught the subtle difference between impossible and challenging but doable. Most remarkably, when a third delegate spoke in what Claire later learned was Portuguese, Malik responded smoothly in the same language, working through a complex point about international regulations. Through it all, Malik remained respectful and professional. He didn't try to negotiate or make decisions. He simply made sure everyone understood everyone else. The young translator watched with a mixture of awe and relief, frantically taking notes as Malik clarified the points he'd missed. Claire found herself studying Malik's face as he worked. The man she'd dismissed as hired help navigated complex technical discussions in multiple languages with the kind of ease that came from real knowledge, not just memorized phrases. Mr. Johnson, Nadia said after Malik had helped resolve a particularly tricky point about regulatory compliance. May I ask where you studied? University of Chicago for my master's in international business, Malik said. But most of the languages I learned growing up or through work. Master's degree. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks as she remembered her joke about him not even knowing what they did there. And you currently work as? Nadia left the question hanging. Claire saw Malik's slight hesitation, the moment where he could have claimed a more prestigious title. Instead, he answered simply, I drive for Ms. Whitmore's company. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it was heavy with unspoken questions. I see, Nadia said finally. Well, your assistance today has been invaluable. An hour later, the impossible had happened. The deal wasn't just saved, it was stronger than before. Clear communication had revealed that both sides wanted very similar things. They'd just been talking past each other. As the consortium team gathered their materials, Nadia approached Claire privately. Ms. Whitmore, I have to say I'm impressed. By the terms we've agreed on? By your willingness to find solutions rather than make excuses. Nadia glanced toward Malik, who was helping the young translator understand some finer points. Many executives would have blamed the translator and walked away. You found a way to fix the problem. Claire wanted to correct her, to explain that it was Malik who'd fixed the problem, not her. But Nadia was still speaking. In our culture, we have a saying. The wise leader listens with many ears. Today you showed us that wisdom. As Nadia walked away, Claire felt the weight of the compliment and the guilt it carried. She hadn't been wise, she'd been desperate and lucky enough to have dismissed someone whose talents far exceeded her understanding. Ruth appeared at her elbow, beaming. Well done, Claire. I'll admit, I had my doubts when you brought in the driver, but it worked brilliantly. His name is Malik, Claire said quietly. And he's not just a driver. Ruth looked confused, but before she could respond, Evan bounded over with barely contained excitement. Claire, that was incredible. How did you know he spoke all those languages? That was genius-level strategy. Strategy. As if she'd planned the whole thing instead of stumbling into it through desperation and Malik's grace. I didn't know, she said. What do you mean? I mean, I didn't know he spoke 9 languages. I didn't know he had a master's degree. I didn't know anything about him except that he showed up on time and kept the car clean. Evan's expression shifted. Oh. Oh, Claire repeated. Across the room, Malik was shaking hands with Mr. Al-Rashid, who was speaking animatedly in Arabic. Malik nodded and replied, and both men laughed about something. It was the most relaxed Claire had seen any of the consortium team all day. Claire, Ruth said carefully, perhaps we should discuss how to integrate Mr. Johnson's skills more formally into the company structure. Integrate. Claire heard the subtext. They wanted to use Malik's abilities while keeping him safely categorized in a way that made sense to them. I'll handle it, Claire said. 20 minutes later, Claire found herself alone with Malik in the hotel elevator, heading down to the parking garage. The other executives had stayed behind to coordinate follow-up meetings. The silence between them felt thick enough to cut. I owe you an apology, Claire said finally. Malik pressed the button for the parking level. You don't owe me anything. I work for you. That's exactly what I'm apologizing for. He looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time since the morning's incident. I made assumptions, Claire continued. Terrible assumptions. And then I made cruel jokes based on those assumptions. You heard what I said this morning. I heard. It was wrong, not just politically incorrect or unprofessional, it was wrong. The elevator opened into the parking garage. Malik stepped out first, then held the door for her. Ms. Whitmore, he said as they walked toward the car. Can I ask you something? Of course. If I hadn't been able to help today, if the deal had fallen through, would you be apologizing right now? The question hit her like cold water. Claire opened her mouth to say yes, of course, but the words wouldn't come. Because she wasn't sure. Would she have connected her morning cruelty to the afternoon's failure? Or would she have blamed the translator, the circumstances? Anything but her own prejudice. I don't know, she said quietly. I hope so, but I honestly don't know. Malik unlocked the car and held her door open. Thank you for being honest. As they drove back toward downtown, Claire found herself studying Malik's reflection in the rearview mirror. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you help me today? After what I said this morning, you could have just not mentioned your language skills. Malik was quiet for a long time, navigating through afternoon traffic. Because watching someone fail when you can help them succeed, that's not who I want to be. Even when they've been cruel to you? Especially then. Claire felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained all day. You're a better person than I am. I don't think that's true. I think you're just scared. The observation was delivered gently, but it landed with surprising force. Scared of what? Same thing most people in power are scared of. That if you're not constantly proving you deserve it, Someone will take it away. Claire stared out the window at the city passing by. How had this man she'd dismissed and mocked, seen through her so clearly? Ruth wants to offer you a different position, she said. Something that would use your language skills officially. Do you think I should take it? I think you should do whatever makes you happy. But Malik? If you stay, I promise I'll never dismiss your value again. What I did today, this morning, it won't happen again. Malik caught her eye in the mirror. I'll think about it. They were pulling up to her building now, the familiar routine of arrival. But something had fundamentally changed. The man opening her car door wasn't just her driver anymore. He was someone who'd saved her career and shown her something about herself she didn't particularly like. As Claire stepped out of the car, she turned back to face him. Malik, thank you. For today, for your grace, for everything. He smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. You're welcome, Ms. Whitmore. Claire, she said, just Claire. Claire, he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice. Warmer. As she rode the elevator up to her penthouse, Claire realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about board meetings or quarterly reports or proving herself to people who doubted her. She was thinking about a man who spoke 9 languages and chose kindness even when faced with cruelty. A man who saw through her fear to something that might, with work, become worthy of his respect. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Claire barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Malik's face in the elevator. Polite, professional, and somehow disappointed in her humanity rather than her actions. She'd built a career on reading people, on understanding their motivations and weaknesses, but she'd completely misjudged the man who'd been driving her around all week. By 6 a.m, she gave up on sleep and made coffee with shaking hands. Her phone showed 17 missed texts celebrating yesterday's deal, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. The victory felt hollow when it came at the cost of her self-respect. At 7:30, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Whitmore, this is Malik. I wanted you to know I've decided to accept the position Ms. Caldwell offered. I'll be transitioning from driving duties to the International Relations team effective Monday. Thank you for the opportunity. MJ. Claire stared at the message for a long time. Professional, courteous, distant. Everything their relationship had been before yesterday, except now she understood what she was losing. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, Congratulations, you'll be an asset to the team. It felt inadequate, but what else could she say? I'm sorry I judged you? I wish I could start over. Please don't disappear into some other department before I figure out how to be a decent human being. Friday morning brought the executive team meeting Claire had been dreading. The conference room buzzed with energy as Ruth, Evan, and the other department heads celebrated the consortium deal. Claire sat at the head of the table, accepting congratulations that felt increasingly hollow. The board is thrilled, Ruth announced, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Claire, they want a full debrief on your negotiation strategy, particularly how you identified and utilized Mr. Johnson's unique qualifications. Identified. As if she'd discovered Malik's talents through careful observation rather than desperate accident. There wasn't much strategy involved, Claire said. I got lucky. Nonsense, Evan jumped in. You saw potential where others saw just a driver. That's leadership. Claire's stomach churned. Actually, I need to clarify something. The room fell quiet. Ruth's eyebrows rose slightly. I didn't identify Malik's qualifications. I didn't even know about them until the meeting was already failing. I brought him in out of desperation, not insight. Claire, Ruth said carefully, why are you downplaying your role in the success? Because the truth matters. I spent the entire week making assumptions about Malik based on his job title. I dismissed him, made jokes about him, and nearly missed the fact that he has more international business education than half this room. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several people shifted in their chairs. "Well," Ruth said finally, "the important thing is that it worked out." "Is it?" Claire looked around the table. "Is that really the important thing? That we accidentally benefited from my prejudice?" Evan cleared his throat. "Claire, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No." Claire's voice was sharper than she intended. "We should discuss it here, because I guarantee I'm not the only person in this room who would have made the same assumptions. And that's a problem." Ruth's expression grew carefully neutral. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we need to look at how we hire, how we promote, and how we value people. Because if someone with Malik's qualifications can spend a week driving executives around without anyone noticing his potential, we're missing other talents too." The room remained quiet for a long moment. Then Sarah Chen, the head of HR, spoke up. "You know, Claire's right. We hired Malik through a temp agency based purely on his driving record. No one asked about his education or language skills." "Because we needed a driver," Evan said, "not a translator. But now we know he can be both. How many other people are we underutilizing?" Ruth looked thoughtful. "Perhaps it's worth reviewing our hiring practices and our internal mobility policies." It wasn't the dramatic transformation Claire had hoped for, but it was a start. As the meeting moved on to other topics, she felt some small relief. At least Malik's experience might prevent someone else from being dismissed so carelessly. That afternoon, Claire found herself walking down to the International Relations Department on the 15th floor. She told herself she was just checking on the transition, making sure Malik had everything he needed. The truth was messier. She missed him. 3 days of working with a new driver had reminded her how much she'd come to value Malik's quiet competence. His replacement was perfectly professional, but he didn't anticipate her needs or offer gentle observations that helped her think through problems. She found Malik in a small office with a view of the river, reviewing documents with Margaret Torres, the International Relations Director. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, and his desk was already organized with careful precision. "Claire," Margaret looked up with a smile. "Perfect timing. I was just telling Malik how impressed the consortium team was with his work yesterday." Malik stood when Claire entered, a gesture that somehow felt both respectful and distancing. "Ms. Whitmore, how can I help you?" Back to Ms. Whitmore. The brief moment when she'd been Claire had apparently passed. "I wanted to see how you're settling in," Claire said, "and to thank you again for yesterday." "No thanks necessary. I was just doing my job." The words were polite, but Claire heard the wall in them. Professional courtesy with no warmth underneath. "Margaret," Claire said suddenly, "could I borrow Malik for a few minutes? I have some follow-up questions about the consortium terms." "Of course," Margaret said, gathering her files. "I'll let you two talk." When they were alone, Claire closed the office door and leaned against it. "How are you really doing?" she asked. Malik's professional mask slipped slightly. "Fine, it's good work. Interesting projects." "That's not what I meant." He sat back down, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "What did you mean?" Claire sat, trying to find the right words. "I meant, how are you dealing with working for a company where the CEO spent a week treating you like you were invisible?" Malik was quiet for a moment, looking out at the river. "You weren't treating me like I was invisible. You were treating me exactly like what you thought I was." "Which was?" "Temporary help. Someone whose thoughts and opinions didn't matter because they weren't relevant to your world." The words hit like physical blows. "That's not, isn't it?" Malik turned to look at her directly. "Claire, you're not a cruel person, but you live in a bubble where drivers are just drivers and assistants are just assistants, and people like me are just there to make your life easier until we're not needed anymore." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're right, but I'm trying to change that." "I know. I heard about what you said in the executive meeting this morning." "Word travels fast." Margaret was impressed that you were willing to admit your mistakes publicly. Not many executives would do that. They sat in silence for a moment, watching boats move slowly down the Chicago River. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said finally. "Sure. Why did you take the driving job in the first place? You're obviously qualified for much more." Malik leaned back in his chair, considering his answer. "Because sometimes it's easier to be underestimated than to fight for respect you might not get anyway." The honesty in his voice made Claire's chest ache. "That's incredibly sad." "It's realistic. I've had plenty of jobs where I was technically qualified but never quite fit, where people were always a little surprised by my competence, like it was an anomaly instead of just who I am." "So you took a job where competence was simple. Show up on time, drive safely, don't cause problems." "Exactly. No one expects more from a driver than driving." "But you deserved more," Claire said quietly. "You deserve to be seen." Malik's expression softened slightly. "Everyone deserves to be seen. That's not unique to me." "No, but—" Claire searched for the right words. "I spent a week riding in your car. You asked if I was okay when I was stressed. You anticipated problems before they happened. You treated everyone with kindness even when they didn't return it. Those aren't driver skills, those are human skills. Good human skills." Malik was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that. I should have said it sooner. A lot sooner." Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Sienna about her next meeting. She glanced at it and sighed. "I should go," she said, standing. "But Malik, I'm glad you're here. In this department, in this building, I'm just glad you're here." As she reached the door, Malik's voice stopped her. "Claire?" She turned back. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here too. Mistakes and all." The warmth in his voice made her smile for the first time all week. Over the following weeks, Claire found excuses to stop by the International Relations Department. Sometimes it was legitimate business, follow-up questions about the consortium deal, requests for language clarification on new contracts. Sometimes it was less legitimate, asking Margaret about department needs that could have been handled through email. But slowly, she and Malik began to build something that resembled friendship. He told her about growing up in a neighborhood where speaking Spanish opened doors that English couldn't. How his grandmother had insisted he learn Portuguese because you never know when beauty will speak to you in another language. How he'd picked up Arabic from a college roommate, French from a girlfriend, Mandarin from a part-time job in Chinatown. She told him about the pressure of inheriting a company at 28, about feeling constantly judged by people who'd known her father, about the loneliness of leadership when every conversation felt like a test she might fail. Their conversations were careful at first, professional topics with personal undertones, but gradually they became more honest. "Can I ask you something?" Malik said one evening as they walked to the parking garage together. It had become a routine, Claire timing her departure to match his, claiming she needed the walk. Always. "Why are you so afraid of making mistakes?" Claire was quiet for a moment, listening to their footsteps echo in the concrete stairwell. "Because women like me don't get second chances." "Women like you?" "Young, inherited the position instead of earning it. Emotional instead of calculating." She paused at the landing between floors. "If I fail, they won't just replace me. They'll use my failure to justify never taking another chance on someone like me." Malik nodded slowly. "That's a lot of pressure to carry alone." "It's the job." "No, it's not. The job is running the company. The rest is fear." They'd reached the parking level. Malik's car, a modest sedan he'd bought with his driver's salary, sat next to Claire's BMW. "Want to grab dinner?" Claire asked impulsively. Malik hesitated. "Claire, as friends, if we're friends, are we friends?" The question hung in the air between them. Claire realized she was holding her breath. Yes, Malik said finally. We're friends. Then dinner. I know a place that makes amazing Thai food, and I promise not to talk about work the entire time. Malik smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him. All right, but I'm driving. I know a better place. The restaurant Malik chose was nothing like the upscale places Claire usually frequented. It was small, crowded, and filled with the sound of families talking over steaming bowls of pho. They sat at a tiny table near the window, and Claire realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten somewhere that felt this alive. How did you find this place? She asked, watching Malik order in what she assumed was Vietnamese. I used to live a few blocks from here. Mrs. Nguyen, the owner, taught me Vietnamese in exchange for helping her son with his English homework. Of course, he spoke Vietnamese too. Claire was beginning to wonder if there were any languages Malik didn't know. How many is that now? Languages, 10 if you count Vietnamese. 11 if you count the German I'm working on. 11 languages, that's extraordinary. Malik shrugged. Not really, I just like talking to people. Languages are bridges. Their food arrived, and Claire found herself laughing more than she had in months. Malik told stories about language mix-ups and cultural misunderstandings. He did impressions of various accents that had her wiping tears from her eyes. For the first time since inheriting the company, Claire felt like herself instead of the role she played. Can I ask you something personal? She said as they shared mango sticky rice for dessert. Shoot. Are you happy? Here, I mean, at the company. Malik considered the question. I'm happier than I was a month ago. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. He met her eyes across the small table. Ask me again in a few months. A few months. The assumption that they'd still be having these conversations, still building whatever this was, between them. Malik? Yeah? Thank you for giving me a chance to be better than I was. He reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, friendly, but Claire felt it like electricity. Thank you for wanting to be better, he said quietly. As they walked back to their cars, Claire realized something had shifted again. The careful professional distance was gone. The polite friendship they'd built was evolving into something deeper and more complicated. Something that might, if she was very lucky and very careful, become worth the risk. 2 months after that dinner at the Vietnamese restaurant, Claire found herself looking forward to work for the first time since she'd inherited the company. Not because of the quarterly reports or board meetings, but because of the 10 minutes she'd spend walking to the parking garage with Malik every evening. Their friendship had deepened in small, careful increments. Shared lunches when their schedules allowed. Conversations about everything from international politics to terrible movies they both loved. Malik teaching her basic phrases in different languages, laughing when she butchered the pronunciation. Claire told herself it was just friendship, but lying awake at night, she knew it had become something more complicated. The crisis came on a Tuesday afternoon when Sienna burst into Claire's office without knocking. Claire, we have a problem. Claire looked up from her laptop, where she'd been pretending to review budget projections while actually researching Ethiopian restaurants to surprise Malik for his birthday next week. What kind of problem? The kind that involves photos. Sienna handed her a tablet showing a gossip blog called Corporate Chicago. The headline read, CEO's new boy toy. Whitmore Industries exec spotted getting cozy with employee. Below it were photos. Claire and Malik leaving the Vietnamese restaurant, his hand briefly touching her back as he held the door. Claire laughing at something he said in the parking garage. The two of them sitting close together on a bench outside the building during lunch. Claire's head tilted toward him in obvious attention. Claire's stomach dropped. The photos weren't inappropriate, but they told a story, especially when paired with the article's insinuations about workplace favoritism, and questions about professional boundaries. "How bad is this?" Claire asked, though she already knew. "Ruth wants to see you in her office. Now." Sienna's expression was sympathetic but worried. "Claire, there's more. Someone leaked information about Malik's transition from the driver position. They're calling it suspicious that he got promoted so quickly after the consortium deal." Claire felt sick. "They're making it sound like I promoted him because I'm... Yeah." As Claire walked to Ruth's office, her mind raced. The photos weren't damning by themselves, but in the context of corporate gossip, they painted her as a woman who'd let personal feelings compromise her professional judgment. It didn't matter that Malik was brilliantly qualified. The narrative would be that she'd promoted her boyfriend. Ruth's office felt colder than usual. The board chair sat behind her massive desk, with Evan beside her, both wearing expressions of barely controlled frustration. "Sit down, Claire." Claire sat, trying to project confidence while her world crumbled around her. "I assume you've seen the photos," Ruth began. "Yes." "Are they accurate?" "They're taken out of context." "Are you romantically involved with Malik Johnson?" The direct question hung in the air. Claire could lie. The photos showed friendship, not romance. She could claim it was all blown out of proportion. "No," she said quietly. "We're friends. Friends who have dinner together. Friends who spend considerable time together outside of work." Ruth's voice was sharp. "Claire, perception is reality in our business. These photos suggest impropriety, whether it exists or not." "So what are you saying?" Evan leaned forward. "We're saying you need to distance yourself from Mr. Johnson, professionally and personally." "Distance myself?" "Different departments, different projects. No more casual lunches or after-work conversations." Ruth's tone brooked no argument. "The board is already questioning your judgment, Claire. This cannot become a pattern." Claire felt anger rise in her chest. "Malik is one of the most valuable employees we have. The consortium deal was months ago. And now people are questioning whether he earned his position through merit or through personal connections to you." The injustice of it hit Claire like a physical blow. Malik's talent, his education, his contributions, all of it reduced to gossip about her personal life. "This is ridiculous." "This is business," Ruth said firmly. "You're young, Claire. You can afford to make personal connections later in your career. Right now, you need to prove you can lead without distractions." Distractions. As if Malik was something frivolous instead of the person who'd helped her become a better leader and a better human being. "I need time to think about this." "There's nothing to think about. This is not a request, Claire. It's a directive from the board." Claire stood, feeling dizzy. "And if I refuse?" Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Don't make me answer that question." Claire found Malik in his office, staring at his computer screen with an expression of barely controlled anger. He looked up when she knocked, and she could see he'd already seen the photos. "Hey," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "Hey," his voice was carefully neutral. "I just met with Ruth." "And?" Claire sat across from his desk, the same chair where they'd had their first real conversation months ago. "They want us to stop spending time together. Professional distance." Malik nodded slowly. "I figured as much." "This is insane. We're friends. We have lunch sometimes. We've never—" "Claire," Malik's voice was gentle but firm. "It doesn't matter what we have or haven't done. It matters what it looks like. So we're supposed to pretend we don't know each other? Pretend we didn't become friends? We're supposed to protect your career." The resignation in his voice broke something in Claire's chest. "What about protecting yours? They're questioning whether you earned your position." "I always knew that was a possibility." Malik leaned back in his chair. "A black man getting promoted quickly in a mostly white company? Of course, people would look for explanations that had nothing to do with competence." That's not fair. Fairness is a luxury, Claire. You're learning that, but I've always known it. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. So what do we do? Claire asked. We do what we have to do. You keep your job, I keep mine. We pretend this friendship never happened. I don't want to pretend that. Malik's expression softened. I don't want to pretend it either, but sometimes wanting something isn't enough. That evening, Claire sat in her penthouse apartment, staring out at the Chicago skyline. She'd built her entire adult life around this career, this company, this role. Everything she was, everything she'd worked for, tied up in being Claire Whitmore, CEO. But sitting there alone, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd been truly happy before Malik came into her life. The job that had once felt like destiny now felt like a beautiful prison. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in California. Saw the photos online. Good for you. He's cute and sounds amazing. Don't let the corporate jerks ruin this. Claire stared at the message for a long time. Her sister, who barely followed business news, had seen the photos, which meant they were everywhere. Another text, this one from Malik. I've been thinking, maybe I should transfer to a different company, make this easier for everyone. Claire's heart clenched. She called him immediately. Don't you dare, she said when he answered. Claire. No, you're not running away because I can't handle office gossip. You belong here. You earned your place here. Did I? Or did I earn it by being useful to you at exactly the right moment? You earned it by being brilliant and kind and incredibly good at your job. The timing was just luck. She could hear him sigh through the phone. Claire, this is bigger than office gossip. This is about your future. What if I don't want the future they're offering me? What do you mean? I mean, what if I'm tired of being afraid? What if I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think instead of what's right? You're talking about your entire career. I'm talking about my entire life. The silence stretched between them, full of things neither had said but both understood. Claire, Malik said finally, are we still talking about friendship here? Claire closed her eyes, her heart racing. I don't know. Are we? I think you know we're not. Then what are we talking about? We're talking about whether you're willing to choose what makes you happy over what makes you safe. The next morning, Claire called an emergency board meeting. She'd spent the night thinking, planning, and finally understanding what she wanted her life to look like. The boardroom filled with familiar faces, Ruth, Evan, and 6 other executives who'd known her since she was a child attending company picnics with her father. They looked concerned, sympathetic, ready to help her weather this latest storm. Thank you all for coming, Claire began, standing at the head of the table. I know you're expecting me to address the photos and rumors about my relationship with Malik Johnson. Nods around the table. Ruth gestured for her to continue. I want to be completely transparent with all of you. Malik and I are friends, close friends. And yes, I have feelings for him that go beyond friendship. The room went very quiet. However, Claire continued, those feelings developed after he proved himself professionally. His promotion was based solely on merit, his education, his language skills, and his performance during the consortium negotiations. Any suggestion otherwise is both inaccurate and unfair to him. Claire, Ruth said carefully, what are you trying to tell us? I'm telling you that I refuse to sacrifice a good man's reputation or my own happiness to protect myself from gossip. Evan leaned forward. You're talking about risking everything you've built here. Am I? Let me ask you something. In the 6 months since the consortium deal, has my leadership improved or declined? The board members exchanged glances. Ruth spoke first. It's improved. Significantly. Why do you think that is? You've become more confident, more decisive, more... Ruth paused. More connected to the people around you. Exactly. Because Malik's friendship made me a better person, which made me a better leader. So explain to me how destroying that friendship protects this company's interests. Claire took a deep breath. I'm not asking for your permission to have feelings for someone. I'm not asking you to approve my personal choices. I'm telling you that I won't distance myself from Malik to satisfy gossip. If that's unacceptable to the board, then you have a decision to make. Are you threatening to resign? Evan asked, his voice strained. I'm telling you that I'd rather resign than compromise my integrity or his. But I don't want to resign. I want to lead this company, and I want to do it as a whole person, not someone who's afraid of living her life. The boardroom fell silent. Claire could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Finally, Ruth spoke. The consortium deal brought in $47 million in new revenue. Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, and our stock price has risen 12% since you took over. Yes. Those are facts, the photos are gossip. Ruth looked around the table at the other board members. I think we can work with facts. One by one, the other board members nodded. Claire found Malik in the company coffee shop, staring into a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She slid into the chair across from him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hey, she said. Hey, he looked up, and she could see the resignation in his eyes. How did the board meeting go? I told them the truth. Which truth? That you're amazing at your job, that you earned your position through merit, and that I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship. Malik's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. You told the board you have feelings for me. I told them I refuse to pretend otherwise to protect myself from gossip. Claire, what did they say? They said facts matter more than gossip. And the fact is that I'm a better leader when I'm not afraid to be myself. Malik set his coffee down and leaned back in his chair. So what happens now? Now I hope you feel the same way I do. Because if you don't, I just made a very dramatic gesture for nothing. A smile tugged at the corners of Malik's mouth. What way do you feel? Like I've been lying to myself for months. Like friendship was just the safe word I used because I was afraid to want more. And now I'm tired of being afraid. Malik reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady, real. Claire Whitmore, he said softly, are you asking me out? I'm asking if you want to find out what happens when we stop pretending we're just friends. Yes, he said without hesitation. I definitely want to find out. Claire felt something loosen in her chest. Fear she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Good, she said, because I was really hoping you'd say that. 6 months later, Claire stood in the same conference room where she'd nearly lost the consortium deal. This time, she was presenting the company's annual results to the board, with Malik beside her as Director of International Relations. The numbers were impressive. Revenue up 18%. 3 new international partnerships. Employee retention at record highs. Any questions? Claire asked as she finished her presentation. Ruth raised her hand with a slight smile. Just one. Are you happy? It was an unusual question for a board meeting, but Ruth had earned the right to ask it. She'd supported Claire through the gossip storm, defended her decisions, and become something like a mentor. Claire glanced at Malik, who was organizing the presentation materials with the same careful attention to detail he'd shown as her driver. He caught her looking and winked. Yes, Claire said, I'm happy. Good, because happy leaders make better decisions. After the board members filed out, Claire and Malik found themselves alone in the conference room where their story had really begun. You know, Malik said, leaning against the table where he'd first saved her career, I never did get to properly thank you. Thank me for what? For choosing to see me, really see me, even when it would have been easier not to. You saved my career before I ever saw you clearly. I helped with a translation problem. You changed your entire worldview. Claire moved closer to him, still amazed that she could do that now. Choose closeness instead of distance. We both changed, she said. That's what love does, isn't it? It changes us. Love? Malik's eyebrows rose. Is that what we're calling this? What would you call it? Malik considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything important. I'd call it the best decision you ever made. Second best, Claire corrected. What was the first? Deciding to stop being afraid of making mistakes. Malik kissed her then, soft and sure, and right there in the conference room where she'd nearly lost everything and found herself instead. When they broke apart, Claire was smiling. What? Malik asked. I was just thinking about that morning when I laughed about the poor driver who probably didn't even know what we did here. And I'm glad I was wrong about almost everything. Almost everything? I was right about one thing. You were poor. At least in terms of money. Malik laughed. And now? Now we're both rich, just not in the way I thought mattered. As they walked out of the conference room together, partners in business and in life, Claire realized she'd finally learned the difference between having everything and having what mattered. It had taken a man who spoke 9 languages to teach her the most important lesson of all. That the heart, when it finally finds its home, needs no translation.